She could give him a proper family, my aunt declared after demanding I leave my husband. I ended the call right away. 3 weeks later, my uncle called. I never imagined my marriage would collapse because of a birthday request. The afternoon was ordinary. I was chopping vegetables for dinner when my phone buzzed. Aunt Deborah's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated. My finger hovered over the answer button. Aunt Deborah had always been complicated. The type of woman who entered rooms expecting attention, who spoke in declarations rather than conversations, the kind of person who believed her opinions were facts. I answered anyway. "Emma, darling," her voice dripped with artificial sweetness. "I need to discuss something important with you." My stomach tightened. That tone, I recognized it from childhood. It preceded unreasonable demands disguised as favors. "It's about Julie's birthday next month," she continued. "She's turning 25 and I want to give her something special, something meaningful." I murmured agreement while slicing carrots. Julie, my cousin, had always been Deborah's pride, her golden child, a mini version of herself with the same calculated smile and practiced charm. "I've been thinking about what would truly make her happy." Deborah paused dramatically, and then it hit me, the perfect gift. The knife slipped, nearly catching my finger. "I want you to divorce Jerry." The carrot rolled off the cutting board, hit the floor with a dull thud. "What?" My voice sounded distant, disconnected from my body. "Julie has always admired him, you know that?" Her tone remained conversational, as if discussing the weather. "And frankly, Emma, he deserves someone who can truly appreciate him." My lungs constricted, air trapped, words failed me completely. "Besides," she continued, "your marriage has been struggling, don't deny it. I can tell these things." Blood rushed to my face, heat crawling up my neck. "Jerry would never." "Don't be so certain," she cut me off. "Men are predictable creatures, they go where they're appreciated. Julie could give him children, a proper family." The room tilted slightly, my grip tightened on the counter edge. "This is insane," I finally managed. "I'm hanging up now. Think about it." Her voice hardened. "Family should come first, always." I ended the call, stood motionless in our suddenly too quiet kitchen. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Divorce Jerry, my husband of 3 years, the man who kissed me goodbye every morning and held me close every night, for a birthday gift. The absurdity should have made me laugh. Instead, tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, because underneath the madness of the request lay something darker, a deliberate cruelty, a reminder of my greatest pain. Deborah knew about our fertility struggles, the repeated disappointments, the treatments that drained our savings and hope simultaneously. She knew how I blamed myself, how the inability to conceive had carved hollow spaces inside me. And she had weaponized it, perfectly, precisely. I didn't tell Jerry about the call that night, or the next. Some conversations are too bizarre to translate into words, too painful to voice. Instead, I watched him, studied his expressions over breakfast, analyzed his tone when he called during lunch breaks, scrutinized the way his eyes met mine across the dinner table. Looking for signs, doubts, cracks in our foundation, I found nothing unusual, just Jerry being Jerry, predictable, steady, familiar. 3 days passed in this strange, self-imposed surveillance before Deborah struck again. This time, a group text to our extended family about an upcoming gathering, 15 people, all relatives. A seemingly innocent message that ended with, "Emma might not attend, she's been going through some personal struggles lately, we should all give her space." My phone exploded with concerned messages. Was I okay? Did I need anything? What was happening? Jerry looked up from his laptop. Confusion creased his forehead. "What's this about personal struggles?" My throat dried up, words stuck like burrs. "I have no idea," I lied. "You know how Deborah exaggerates." He frowned, unconvinced. "Are you sure there's nothing you want to tell me?" The question hung between us. An invisible barrier suddenly erected where none had existed before. Everything's fine, I insisted, more to convince myself than him. That night I lay awake beside him, listening to his breathing. The steady rhythm that had once been my lullaby now kept me painfully alert. Why would Deborah do this? The questions circled endlessly. What possible satisfaction could she gain from attacking my marriage? The answer eluded me, slippery as shadow. The following week brought a new assault, subtle but devastating. Deborah invited Jerry to lunch. Just to catch up, she claimed. He went, seeing nothing unusual in the invitation. He'd always gotten along well with my family, better than I did sometimes. He returned from that lunch different, quieter, distracted. What did you talk about? I asked, trying to sound casual. Nothing important, he replied, not meeting my eyes, just family stuff. That night he worked late. The next night too, suddenly his schedule was filled with unexpected meetings and work emergencies. His phone buzzed more frequently. He took calls in other rooms, voice lowered. Classic signs. Every women's magazine article about infidelity listed them like bullet points, but I trusted Jerry, or wanted to, needed to. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't see, was the subtle web Deborah had begun weaving around him. The seeds of doubt planted during that innocent lunch, the perfectly timed text messages that followed, the sympathetic ear offered when he mentioned our fertility struggles. Emma doesn't confide in me, she had told him, voice laced with manufactured concern. Has she told you how she's really feeling about everything? The treatment's failing again? She knew precisely where our vulnerabilities lay, the fault lines in our communication, the fears we struggled to articulate to each other. Deborah's manipulation was masterful, slow, patient. She didn't rush in with obvious advances. She built trust first, positioned herself as an ally, a confidant, someone who understood him better than I could. You carry so much on your shoulders, she told him over coffee meetings I knew nothing about. Emma's lucky to have someone so supportive. The texts escalated gradually, first checking in about work, then sending articles about coping with fertility issues ostensibly for him to share with me, later more personal messages, compliments, inside jokes. Small betrayals that made larger ones possible, until the night I found him packing a bag. My heart, it stopped. What are you doing? My voice sounded strange, high-pitched and fragile. He flinched, hadn't heard me enter our bedroom. I need some time, he said, each word deliberate, rehearsed. To think. About what? The question escaped before I could swallow it. He zipped the bag closed, a finality in the sound that echoed through my bones. Us, this marriage, he gestured vaguely between us. I don't think it's working anymore. The room swayed, tilted on its axis. Since when? I whispered. Emma, he sighed, a dismissal rather than endearment. We haven't been happy for a long time, you know that. But I didn't know that, had lived inside a completely different marriage than the one he was describing. Is this about Julie? The question burst forth. His eyebrows shot up, genuine confusion. What does Julie have to do with anything? Not Julie then, but something, someone. He left that night, wouldn't say where he was going, just promised to call in a few days when things were clearer. The door closed behind him with a soft click, the gentleness of it somehow worse than a slam would have been. I sat on our bed, perfectly still, hours passing unmarked. Deborah, this had her fingerprints all over it. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Had she convinced him to leave, poisoned him against me somehow? I called her the next morning, no answer, texted, nothing. My parents offered sympathetic platitudes. Marriages go through rough patches. Give him space. Everything happens for a reason. None of them knew about Deborah's request. I couldn't bring myself to explain the absurdity of it. A week passed, then another. Jerry's presence in our home faded like a photograph left in sunlight. His toothbrush missing from the bathroom, his books no longer stacked on the nightstand, his shoes absent from the rack by the door. Small subtractions that added up to an emptiness larger than the sum of its parts. He texted occasionally, brief messages devoid of emotion. Hope you're okay, taking care of yourself. "We'll call soon," but he never called. I functioned on autopilot, went to work, came home, ate something though I couldn't later recall what, slept fitfully in our too-large bed. 3 weeks after Jerry left, Uncle Stephen called me, Deborah's husband. A quiet man who existed primarily in his wife's shadow. "Can we meet for coffee?" His voice sounded strained. "There's something you should know." We met at a small cafe downtown. Stephen looked terrible, skin sallow, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling slightly as he stirred sweetener into his coffee. "I found something," he began without preamble. "Emails between Deborah and Jerry." My stomach dropped, free-falling into emptiness. "They've been," he struggled for words, "involved for months now." "That's not possible," I whispered, but even as I denied it, pieces clicked into place. Jerry's late nights, his distraction, the sudden work emergencies. Stephen pushed his phone across the table. Emails opened on the screen. I couldn't not look, couldn't stop myself from reading words that sliced through me like carefully placed incisions. The messages started 6 months ago, casual at first, then increasingly intimate, explicit, plans made, secret meetings arranged. My husband and my aunt. The betrayal was so complete it felt almost impressive in its totality. "She used Julie as a distraction," Stephen explained, voice hollow, "made you worry about the wrong threat so you wouldn't see the real one." I pushed the phone back, my hands surprisingly steady. "Why are you showing me this?" His eyes met mine, a shared pain reflected. "Because we deserve better than being collateral damage in there, whatever this is." I left the cafe in a strange calm, emotions too numerous, too contradictory to process. They would come later, I knew, crashing down like a delayed tidal wave. But first, I needed answers. I drove to Deborah's house, didn't call ahead, didn't plan what I would say. Her car wasn't in the driveway, but Jerry's was. My wedding ring caught the sunlight as I rang the doorbell. A final mockery. Jerry opened the door, froze when he saw me. He looked different, thinner, hair uncombed, dark circles beneath his eyes. "Emma," my name barely audible on his lips. "Is she here?" I asked, voice steady. He shook his head. "She's at yoga." Of course she was, life continuing as normal for Deborah while the rest of us drowned in her wake. I pushed past him into the house, the same house I'd visited countless times growing up. Family dinners, holiday gatherings, now tainted beyond recognition. "How long?" I demanded, no need to clarify the question. He sank onto the couch, shoulders slumped in defeat. 8 months, he admitted. "It just happened." Affairs don't just happen. They're built from thousands of small choices, deliberate betrayals stacked one atop another until they form something too substantial to deny. "Are you in love with her?" The question tasted bitter on my tongue. "I thought I was." His laugh held no humor. "She made me believe it." "Tell me how," I said, a demand rather than request, how it started. Jerry's eyes fixed on some middle distance, seeing the past rather than present. "It was after the 3rd failed treatment," he began, voice hollow. "You were distant, unreachable." I felt helpless. My chest tightened, the memory still raw. Deborah texted, asked how we were doing. It seemed innocent. He swallowed hard. "She suggested coffee just to talk, said she was worried about you." The calculated precision of it, the perfect moment of vulnerability identified and exploited. "She listened, really listened." His voice cracked, made me feel understood when nothing else made sense. I could picture it, Deborah's practiced empathy, the perfect head tilt, the concerned touch on his arm at just the right moment. She started texting more frequently, checking in, sending articles about coping with fertility issues. He rubbed his face. Then it became more personal, compliments, inside jokes. Each step was so small, so incremental, building a foundation for betrayal brick by innocent-seeming brick. When did it become physical? The question burned my throat. After that dinner at your parents', the one where you shut down completely when your mom mentioned adoption. I remembered the panic that had gripped me, the bathroom where I'd hidden, gasping for air. Deborah followed me outside, said she understood how difficult it must be, his voice dropped, that sometimes people need comfort in unconventional ways. The perfect predator, identifying weakness, striking with precision. It was just once, at first, a mistake. His eyes finally met mine, desperate for understanding I couldn't provide. But then she made me believe we had something real, that what I felt with her was what had been missing between us. "And now?" I asked, my voice was strangely steady. "Now I see what she really is." Bitterness edged his words. "She never wanted me, she wanted to destroy what we had. The moment I moved in, everything changed. She became controlling, manipulative." "Too late? The realization always comes too late." "I want to come home," he whispered. "I'll do anything, counseling, whatever you need." Something cold and clarifying washed through me, a strange sense of peace. "No," I said simply, the single syllable hung between us, final, irrevocable. "Emma, please. You don't get to destroy someone and then ask them to reassemble themselves for your comfort." His face crumpled, tears streaming unchecked. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, the universal excuse of those who inflict unforgivable pain. I removed my wedding ring, placed it on the coffee table between us. The soft clink as it met glass seemed inappropriately delicate for the magnitude of what it represented. "I'll have divorce papers drawn up," I said. "Don't come to the house. I'll have your things sent wherever you want them." "You can't just throw away 3 years," he protested, desperation edging his voice. "I didn't," I replied. "You did." I left him there, surrounded by the wreckage of his choices. The confrontation with Deborah came later, at my parents' house during a family dinner I hadn't planned to attend, but something drove me there, perhaps the need for witnesses, for public acknowledgement of what had been done. She entered with her perfect smile, hair immaculate, Julie trailing behind her like an accessory. Conversation stopped when I stood, all eyes drawn to me. "I'm getting divorced," I announced to the silent room. "Jerry has been sleeping with Deborah for 8 months." The collective intake of breath. My mother's hand was flying to her mouth. My father froze with a fork midair. Deborah's smile never faltered, plastic perfection maintained. "Emma is going through a difficult time," she said smoothly, clearly inventing stories to explain why her husband left. "Stephen found the emails," I interrupted. "He's seen everything." Her composure cracked just briefly, a flicker of something dangerous behind her eyes. "I was trying to help your marriage," she attempted, voice honeyed with false concern. "Jerry came to me, unhappy, desperate for advice." "Stop," my father's voice hard as I'd ever heard it. "Just stop, Deborah." Julie looked between us, confusion etched across her features. "What's happening?" Nobody answered her. The truth was too ugly to voice in plain terms. Deborah gathered her purse, dignity wrapped around her like armor. "You always did have a flair for drama, Emma," she said coldly. "When you're ready to apologize for these accusations, you know where to find me." She left, Julie following automatically, habit of a lifetime. The silence afterward stretched painfully until my mother moved to my side, arms encircling me. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "We had no idea." Neither had I. That was the cruelest part. How completely I'd been fooled by the two people I should have been able to trust most. The divorce proceeded quickly. Jerry didn't contest anything, signed papers without negotiation, disappeared from my life with the same suddenness with which Deborah had entered his. I heard things, of course, small-town whispers impossible to avoid. How Jerry moved out of Deborah's house after only 2 weeks. How Stephen filed for divorce. How Julie stopped speaking to her mother once the truth emerged. How Deborah claimed victimhood, cast herself as misunderstood, abandoned. These details reached me like news from another country, interesting but distant, no longer capable of touching me where it truly hurt. 1 year after Jerry packed his bag, I packed my own, sold our house, accepted a job offer in another state, not running away, moving toward something new. My story was just beginning, undefined, unwritten, mine alone. As I drove away from the town that had witnessed both my greatest joy and deepest pain, rain began to fall. Gentle at first, then heavier, washing the windshield clean with each sweep of the wipers. I thought about Deborah's original request, the absurdity of it, the cruelty. In asking me to divorce Jerry as a gift for Julie, she had revealed more than she intended, showed how little she understood about love, about marriage, about the sacredness of commitment. For her, people were possessions, transferable, disposable. Their value was measured only in what they could provide. I pitied her, suddenly and unexpectedly. The emptiness that must exist at her core, the constant hunger that no relationship could ever satisfy. Perhaps the hardest lesson I learned through all of this wasn't about betrayal or even forgiveness. It was about boundaries, about recognizing that sometimes love isn't enough, sometimes it's just the beautiful beginning of something that requires vigilance, communication, and unwavering respect to sustain. We often speak of trust as if it's a simple thing, given once and secured forever. But trust is both stronger and more fragile than that. It must be continuously earned, continuously honored. And once thoroughly broken, no amount of apology can magically restore it. What Jerry never understood, what Deborah exploited, was that intimacy requires protective boundaries. Not walls that isolate, but clear lines that define what we will and won't accept in our relationships. Every time he shared our private struggles with her, every time he accepted her innocent comfort, he was dismantling those boundaries brick by brick. And in the aftermath of such complete betrayal, I discovered my own strength. Not the brittle kind that refuses to bend, but the resilient kind that can break and still find a way to reshape itself into something new, something stronger. If you find yourself where I once stood, heart shattered, future uncertain, know this: you are more than what was done to you. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's inability to recognize it. And sometimes the most profound act of self-love is walking away from those who cannot honor the sacred trust you placed in them. My scars remain, but they no longer define me. They simply remind me of what I survived.